Hi class, next I want to look at a complex issue, Gnosticism. Question of dependence, of course, is what we're addressing here. Recall that. Did Christianity draw on Gnosticism for its ideas? And that's answered different ways by different scholars. One thing is becoming increasingly clear among historians is that Gnosticism did not predate Christianity. So let me just put it the long and short of it here out up front. In the 4th and 5th century BC, in Persia, all the way through that empire and into the Hellenistic reign of Alexander the Great and his diacoe, all of those, all during that time, there were concepts and ideas that you can call Gnostic. They used dualism, primarily matter and spirit, good and evil, light and darkness. And those ideas and concepts found their way into different religions, into the mystery religions, into everything. And so it leads some scholars to use a broad definition of what that means. And others use, though, a narrow definition of Gnosticism. That is, those ideas actually influenced Christianity in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries. So when we're talking about Gnosticism, some scholars say that Christianity borrowed from Gnosticism. Well, some elements did in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, but not the 1st century. The 1st century was based on historical realities of the person of Jesus Christ. And so we need to keep that distinction in mind as I go through this, because it gets kind of complex sometimes. And we need to remember that simple distinction. Okay, so for example, some scholars like Richard Reinstein's History Religion School, 1927, wrote Hellenistic Mystery Religions and their basic ideas and significance. And in there he argued that some of these ideas Christianity borrowed from. And then Bossuet, a French guy, and then after him, Rudolf Bultmann, notable promoting theories of pre-Christian Gnosticism. Pre-Christian Gnosticism and the influence of Gnosticism on the New Testament itself. So modern scholars now reject these theories, acknowledging that many of the features of later Christian Gnosticism can be drawn from pre-Christian Jewish and Hellenistic roots. Now, it's been over 50 years since the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library. Ancient documents that show Gnosticism did not predate Christianity. Yet you still find scholars from the liberal schools teaching that the view that Christianity borrowed from Gnosticism. Like, for example, T.W. Africa. Even the canon of the New Testament contains Gnostic material in his book, Roman of the Caesars, 1965. And I looked at Bart Ehrman's The New Testament, A Historical Introduction to Early Christian Writings, written in 2000. And there he even starts his discussion about Christianity in the 2nd century. He doesn't even deal with the 1st century. Why? Because he wants to prove that Christianity borrowed from Gnosticism. Now, this is a real big problem today, because when you pick up, you can even find commentaries that still talk about this, that Christianity borrowed from Gnosticism. But let's just go through some details here. Now, there's 5 stages in the development of this idea that Christianity borrowed from Gnosticism. And I'm not going to bore you with those details. You can find them actually in the notes below this lecture. And this lecture is going to be long anyway. So you look at that and you can see the different steps that goes along the way from prior to the 20th century scholars, and then the concept of pre-Christian Gnosticism proposed by W. Ance in 1897. Based on material that he found in Iran and Iraq that actually were manuscripts from the 18th and 19th century. It's crazy stuff. From those manuscripts, he proposes pre-Christian Gnosticism. It's insane. But anyway, Bultmann and then the Nag Hammadi Library corpus in 1945 that was discovered, and now the consensus that none know Gnostic literature that's been discovered in like the Nag Hammadi, like the Gospel of Thomas. None of that predates the first century Christianity. So most scholars reject the view of the history of religion school now. But it all boils down to how you define Gnosticism, right? There's no ancient source uses the term Gnosticism and rarely use the term Gnostic. Now, I'm going to say that again. There is no ancient source that uses the term Gnosticism and rarely uses the term Gnostic. In fact, one scholar, M.A. Williams, calls upon others to abandon the term. And his is a reminder that Gnosticism is a scholarly construct and should always be borne in mind. So what is that construct? It's about what was going on in Christianity from the 2nd to the 4th century. That is, that there were some Christians in some cities that were borrowing Gnostic ideas and Gnostic dualism and applying it to Jesus and to Christianity. Now that happened not just in doctrines of Christianity, but it happened in all kinds of literature where they borrowed ideas of Gnosticism and rewrote stories, actually, philosophical approaches rewritten with a Gnostic twist. So I could go through details on that. And again, let's just think about this. The narrow definition makes more sense. To define Gnosticism, when you use the term Gnosticism, most scholars now are the narrow sense. That is, the 2nd, 3rd century ideas found in Christianity. That's Gnosticism. But when you're talking about the broad definition, the wide definition that liberal scholars like to throw around, it includes almost anything from the 4th century BC all the way through the 4th century AD. That is, it comes to have such a broad connotation that it almost ceases to have any specific reference at all. The lowest common denominator of Hellenistic thought. And Zoroastrianism, Mandaism, Hermetic literature, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and even the New Testament itself, they all say that they all describe that literature as Gnostic. So, by the way, a great scholar, Edmund Yamamuchi, has an article, Gnosticism in the Dictionary of the New Testament Backgrounds, page 416 and 17. That was written in 2000. Dictionary of New Testament Backgrounds. He is a professor at the University of Cincinnati. He addressed the question in a mammoth tome that he also wrote, another one that's not in that dictionary, The Question of a Pre-Christian Gnosticism. And his answer is no, there wasn't. And he goes through excruciating detail to prove his thesis that that Christianity did not borrow from Gnosticism. That Gnosticism, it's a conclusion that many have taken, that many have drawn. Gnostic does not mean or equal Gnosticism. So what a scholar might call Gnostic should not be equated with Gnosticism. You can check out Dr. Jim Hernando's Zondervan commentary on 2 Corinthians. He goes through the major elements of what is involved in a Gnosticism and demonstrates that none of that is apparent in the New Testament. So why does some scholars continue to Why does it keep popping its head up in articles and in commentaries on the New Testament? Well, ideas and terminology found in the Gnosticism of the 2nd century predate the religious phenomena by hundreds of years. That's found in Persian and Hellenistic cultures. So if we're talking about just terminology and ideas, we can find these in Persian and Hellenistic writings, way before Christianity. But the doctrines that characterized 2nd century Gnosticism do not predate Christianity. So from the standpoint of traditional Christianity, even Gnostic ideology and thinking is quite alien. So it's usually mythological in its setting of redemption. It leads to a deprecation of the historical events of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus. So what you'll find is many of these Gnostic scholars, they will try to show that Jesus was not a real historical person. Its view of mankind's relationship to God also leads to a denial of the importance of the person and work of Christ, so that salvation is not understood in terms of deliverance from sin, but as a form of existential self-realization. All right, so the origins of Gnosticism, the literary evidence of the Nag Hammadi, discovered in 1945 in Egypt. These are Coptic manuscripts, that is, written in Coptic, an ancient language that used by the Coptic Church from the very beginning. You might even trace the Coptic Church back to the Ethiopian eunuch. But you know what? When I was in Egypt on a military assignment, I went into a Coptic church, and it was amazing because right in the front wall in glass was an ancient Coptic manuscript of the New Testament. It just blew me away. But anyway, this Coptic papyri, there's 13 of them. They had 52 Gnostic treatises in them. The most famous is the Gospel of Thomas. Now, that's the only full, complete manuscript of the Gospel of Thomas that we have. Now, these were carbon dated to the 4th century, late 4th century, early 5th century. But these Coptic manuscripts were probably written in Greek earlier than that, and then translated into Coptic. So the Greek versions, the earliest date they possibly put on that they say is probable, is the 2nd century or 3rd century. So they include 3 works belonging to the Corpus Hermeticum. It's a partial translation, alteration also of Plato's Republic. So all these codexes, these 13 manuscripts, belong to a nearby monastery where they were buried. Now, why were they buried? Well, in 367 AD, which accords with the carbon dating of these manuscripts, the 4th century, late 4th century, St. Athanasius condemned the use of non-canonical books in his festal letter of 367. That is the Easter letter that was published. And so the idea that St. Athanasius condemned those books, the monastery just buried them. So let's look at, for example, some of the fragments of the sayings in the Gospel of Thomas. I wish we could go through that, but it's non-productive, I think. The bottom line is that these attributed sayings to Jesus are not like the sayings that appear in the Gospels. The sayings that appear in the Gospels are fuller, broader. The sayings in the Gospel of Thomas make Jesus look like some kind of cynic philosopher, okay? Quick aphorisms and these kinds of things. But anyway, some of those sayings in the Gospel of Thomas were also discovered in the Occurrences papyri in 1898. So they matched quotes in other early Christian sources. So subsequently, first our 2nd century date of composition was proposed for those lost original Greek of the Gospel of Thomas. So that would be 2nd century at best, probably 3rd century, when the Greek original was written. That certainly doesn't qualify as something that is apostolic, and so shouldn't be included in the Gospels, with the Gospels. There's many Gospels, apocryphal Gospels, that dates to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century. So the buried manuscripts date, again, like we said, from the 4th century. Now, what are the similarities? We've also found in those treatises of the Nag Hammadi, for example, the Gnosticism of the Blessed, this guy, Gnosticism, he's referred to as the Blessed, and it's a philosopher teaching his pupils about ideas and about dualism and all this kind of stuff, light and darkness. Well, what happens is that actually gets Christianized into a document in the Nag Hammadi called the Sophia of Jesus Christ. Now here it's the same exact teaching, but it comes from the mouth of the risen Christ to his disciples. So again, there's other texts along the way besides those, the Apocalypse of Adam and the Paraphrase of Shem. They also represent a non-Christian form of Gnosticism that becomes Christianized. So this is the direction of scholarship today. So what we have is 1st century Christianity, and then later on, it takes on a Gnostic form. It becomes Gnosticized. And that's the direction that you see in the article, for example, in the New Bible Dictionary. The IVP Press, again, in 1996, has an article, page 416, as well on that one. So the Church Fathers, we have to question, they reacted against the heresy of Gnosticism coming into the church in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and even the 4th century Fathers. And so what they say about Gnosticism, the Church Fathers traced it back to Simon Magus of Acts 8. Said that it had affinities with Zoroastrianism, and that's why they reacted as a pagan Persian religion, right? So this cosmic dualism, matter, spirit, and that kind of thing, and because they said that Jesus only appeared to have a body, didn't really have a body, Gnosticism. It was like Gnosticism that way. The problem of evil is that God, created through a demiurge, because matter is evil, and therefore God. What God said about creation is not true, that it's good, And so it's a whole different cosmology, a whole different person of Jesus, a whole different system of salvation in 2nd, 3rd century Christian Gnosticism. And of course the Church Fathers reacted against that. So the question has to be asked is, was it really Christianity that they were opposing there? Christian Gnosticism? No, I would say it was just plain old heresy. It wasn't Christianity at all. In fact, today, there is a Mandean community in southern Iraq and southwestern Iran. Now, recently they've been sort of wiped out by ISIS, but they were the sole surviving remnants of Gnostic Christianity. So when I was in Iraq in 2005, they were still in existence, Mandean communities of Christians. Their texts, though, only known through late 17th, 18th century manuscripts. They were the texts that were used by the history of religion scholars to reconstruct an alleged pre-Christian Gnosticism. In addition to manuscripts that were early magic bowl text, AD 600, and some magical lead amulets, which date to as early as the 3rd century AD. And so there is no firm evidence to date the origins of Christian Gnosticism earlier than the 2nd century AD. And again, no known Gnostic group that we have evidence of predates original 1st century Christianity. Okay, let's take a look at some characteristic features. First of all, these second century groups had enough in common for us to be able to form some idea of a basic Gnostic system of belief. Now, some say that it's hard to do this, that you really can't come up with a Gnostic system of belief, but if you study those groups in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, you come up with these ideas. All right, so here they are. First, a mythology of cosmology. Where did our evil come from? They associate with answering that is a story or myth of how the universe came to existence. And so the foundation stone of the belief was a radical cosmological dualism, that the world was created, that evil. It was totally separate from and in opposition to the world of spirit. Now, you can find that idea even from the time of Plato, right? The supreme God dealt in unapproachable splendor in the spiritual world and had no dealings with the world of matter. God used intermediaries to create the world. Matter was the creation of an inferior being, a demiurge. He, along with aides, the archons, some also refer to them as the stoicheia, keep mankind imprisoned within their material existence and barred the path of individual souls, trying to ascend to the spirit world after death. By the way, the Apostle Paul uses these terms, archons and the rulers of this world, and stoicheia, the elemental principles, elemental elements, spirits, and so forth. But and he's addressing that with the Colossian heresy, all right? But only those who possess a divine spark, the pneuma, can escape from this corporal existence. And even those possessing such a spark needed to receive enlightenment of gnosis before they could even become aware of their own spiritual condition. So it's not only the washing that's liberty, but it's the knowledge of who we are, that we have, who we've become, where we were and where we're placed, and so forth and so on. Gnosis is then the means of spiritual elevation, illumination. And then look at their anthropology. Mankind is divided into classes of existence, orientations. The most famous Gnostic teacher was Valentius, who was a bishop in Alexandria, who was went to Rome, and in 140 A.D. he taught that there was a series of divine eons and emanations, and he divided humankind into 3 classes. Halics are unbelievers immersed in nature and in the flesh. Psychics are common Christians who live by faith, and then pneumatics are spiritual Gnostics. This Gnostic group led then to asceticism, to put off the world, or it led to libertinism, since the flesh was not their real selves, so it didn't matter what they did with their bodies, right? It resulted in a radical, realized eschatology. We must become people of the Spirit to participate in the eschaton and to realize it through the elevation and illumination of our souls. So in most of the Gnostic system, reported by the Church Fathers, this enlightenment is the work of a divine Redeemer who descends from the spiritual world in disguise. And who is that? It's equated with Jesus in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And so Jesus became the Christ, the man became the Christ by putting on a body, by putting on the Spirit of Christ. And while he had the Spirit of Christ, he led people into an elevation of knowledge, a special gnosis. To be alerted to their existence of his divine pneuma, then, is a result of this gnosis, this special knowledge, to escape on death from the material world to the spiritual. And these are the major characteristics of Gnosticism. And of course, there would be terminological parallels. So some of these parallels, I'm not going to go through all the details here. So you have to ask yourself this question. Would Christianity in the 1st century use the same kind of terms that Gnosticism later on used? And the answer is, of course. So you find the term gnosis and mysterion and stoicheia and eons and different kinds of terms like that. It's because they were common terms of the day. They were used by other religious systems as well. But the Gnostic literature, it doesn't predate 1st century Christianity. So what would you expect? They would use those same terms as well. So look at some of the common terms found in Gnostic literature in the New Testament, but they don't have the same meaning. Terms, the same terms, but they don't carry the same meaning or same sense. So I'm not going to go through all of these terms, but let's just pick out a few of them. Let's look at, well, I don't even have Mysterion. Yeah, Mysterion, the second one there. In the New Testament, it's about God's plan of salvation from ancient times that was hidden in times past, that is in the Old Testament. But now this Mysterion, this mystery of the kingdom of God that Jesus talked about even, and that Paul used in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, is revealed to us. To you is given to know the mystery. See, and we're told to proclaim this mystery of the kingdom of the gospel. But in Gnosticism, it's a secret rite or ritual, which if shared with outsiders would result in being put to death by members of the cult. Huge difference. We could go through all these terms and show these differences. Even Zoe, the word for life at the end. For a Gnostic, it's spiritual life that comes from knowing special secret knowledge of who they really are. A spirit being trapped in a sinful material body. But as used by Jesus and throughout the New Testament, it's eternal life that God now gives through those who believe in Jesus Christ. Because why? It's regeneration by the Holy Spirit, by God Himself. It's a life that's eternal because it's rooted in the existence of God. So New Testament authors, they use these terms, but in different and sometimes unique ways than Gnostic literature.